Gentlemen, welcome to the Mighty Men Project. My goal is to both strengthen and empower men of God so that they can be a source of strength and power for those who depend on them. Today, we're going to be discussing golden calf syndrome, and we're going to start by opening our Bibles to Exodus 32, verses 1 through 6. Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down the mountain, the people assembled around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who will go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him." Aaron said to them, "Tear off the gold rings which are in your ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took the gold from their hands and fashioned it with an engraving tool and made it into a cast metal calf. And they said, "This is your God Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." Now, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So the next day they got up early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink, and got up to engage in lewd behavior. O Israel, if there is a reoccurring theme that modern Christians readily notice happening again and again throughout the Old Testament, it's that this body of people, who is hand-picked by the Creator himself to bring hope to the rest of the world, can't help but get in its own way. Time and time again, we see the Hebrews of old witnessing first-hand miracles that crumbled nations, tore open seas, and literally rained food from the skies. Yet despite this seemingly constant display of power and grace, Israel seems to make it a habit of thumbing their noses at God the moment they get the chance. Before we give this particular story a good old-fashioned tongue-clicking and go on about our day, I propose we give this phenomena a deeper dive with a more historical filter. This is a tale any modern Christian has likely been told 1,000 times as a child, and as such, we often glaze over the reality of what happened in the scriptures we just read above. While Israel clearly violated the covenant they had just agreed to mere weeks before to a God they could actually look up and witness resting atop a mountain within a broiling cloud of smoke and fire, it's important we understand why they acted as they did, and how the modern church also regularly succumbs to this golden calf syndrome themselves. First, we must not underestimate the importance of perspective. At the opening of Exodus, the Hebrew people had been in Egypt for over 400 years, the last century of that being entirely as a slave class under the rule of a tyrannical leader. Thousands upon thousands of the soon-to-be Israelite nation had never known a life that was not under the control of Egypt and not entirely immersed in its culture. This is not the Israel we know in the time of David, full of valiant warriors hardened by constant war. They were simple laborers and craftsmen under the constant threat of genocide at the whims of a cruel leader, incapable of escape and helpless to better their circumstances. Second, we must remember that during this time, Yahweh, or Jehovah, had been relatively quiet. It's clear he had never abandoned his people. We see him blessing the Hebrew midwives for saving the male babies, for example. But he wasn't as visible as he would become during the Exodus. While our modern-day religious upbringing will insist that the gods of Egypt were no more than scribblings on walls and carved statues nailed into temples, the reality portrayed throughout both the Old and New Testament is that until Jesus' ministry and subsequent death and resurrection, the many Elohim that had been given dominion over their respective territories after Babel were both very real and very active. The plagues that God visited upon Egypt were as much a show of dominance to the Hebrews and the nation of Egypt as it was to the powers and principalities that presided over them, declaring his ultimate authority over any other established god. Up until that time, however, it seems much of what they had were stories passed down through generations from Abraham and his line, with a handful of families clinging to their Hebrew roots instead of submitting to the culture they were trapped in. This brings us to point number 3. To the Hebrews, the religions of Egypt were a part of their daily life and had been for hundreds of years. They had been submerged in a culture that had literally hundreds of deities that overlapped one another in importance and duties. Even if they didn't actively worship them, which according to Jeremiah many did, the average Hebrew would be mired in the various religious customs and traditions of Egypt on a regular basis. To suggest that there was only one true God wouldn't have made much sense to any individual living at that time, including the Israelites. For God to claim and then subsequently display through the plagues and preceding exodus from Egypt that he was the Most High God was significant on a level most modern Christians don't bother trying to understand. As a brief historical aside, if you've ever wondered, why a golden calf? The short answer is that the predominant religious cult of the Hebrews at the time was linked to that of Hathor, or Hathor, who was often depicted as a cow. Some scholars also believe that this particular religion was related to Baal, or Baal's consort, Ashura, a Canaanite goddess who was commonly revered in nearby cities and spread through the prominent trade routes that intersected the region. All of this information is key to understanding golden calf syndrome, as we now skip ahead past Israel's deliverance to the Mount Sinai episode. Many extraordinary things took place on their way to the mountain. The gods they had once revered in Egypt had been entirely overpowered by God's plagues. They had received food in the form of manna that rained down from heaven every day, and had even been delivered in battle by a terrible enemy, Amalek, which is made even more miraculous, given that the Hebrews at this time had no real experience in warfare. Truly, there could be little doubt that they were being led by a very real and very powerful deity, unlike any others that had come before him. Incredibly, it is mentioned on multiple occasions that despite the constant displays of divine grace, the Hebrews continually grumbled and complained against Moses when things got rough. They often lamented the comforts they had left behind them despite their slavery, and even seemed to threaten Moses' very life when the pressure was on. Through every instance of their disbelief and frustration, God rescued them and provided the means to ease their struggles. His message seemed to be very clear. I am the Most High, and I want you to be my people. They are eventually led to the foot of Mount Sinai, where he makes a covenant with them and, as we can see, shares his purpose for having delivered them in the first place. Let's turn to Exodus 19, verses 3 through 6. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, This is what you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Here we see God's overall intent for Israel. They are not just a people being singled out by God to worship and serve themselves, but as a priest nation for the sake of the whole earth. This last element is something we as modern Christians often overlook. This declaration of dominion over all was a very pointed challenge to the gods of the ancient world, as was God's charge to Israel to serve as his example to the rest of the nations. Whereas most religions had a pantheon of gods with divided responsibilities and power in geological territories, this Jehovah was not interested in sharing and wanted to use Israel to bring the rest of the world back to him. Israel was to be the vessel of God's grace, but the goal has always been all of humanity. Is it any wonder Israel continues to be so hated even to this day? Entire books have been written concerning God's descent onto Sinai, so we won't dwell too long here, except to focus on two important points. First, all of Israel witnessed with their own eyes and ears the majestic display of power God exhibited atop the mountain. And second, they were so terrified of it, they thought they would die. They even begged Moses to listen for them and simply come back with the message so they would be spared this experience. Moses' answer was quite pointed. All of this was necessary. This God that delivered them from Egypt had proven time and time again that he was patient and merciful and all-powerful. But it was important to remind them that he had boundaries that they needed to respect should they wish to honor this covenant they all agreed to enter into with him. What happened next is something we have heard 1,000 times again. Moses is sent to the mountain, followed by the extended absence that resulted in the people demanding a golden calf from Aaron, which he agrees to do. Something we tend to overlook is what it represented and why. Even sitting at the foot of the mountain where God's presence and voice were readily observable, they regressed. They embraced an idol from their past, and we as modern Christians click our tongues and roll our eyes at the absurdity of this decision while we actively participate in the exact same mistake. What is golden calf syndrome? It is the adoption and the blind adherence to comfortable religious traditions and rhetoric over a real and raw relationship with an all-powerful God that we cannot control or contain. It is congregating around spiritual and religious leaders, teachers and family that tell us what we like to hear, instead of personally seeking a creator that holds us personally accountable. It's going to a building once or twice a week to listen to a different iteration of the same sermon we've heard countless times before while checking our watch, even as the scriptures lay in our laps full of wonders the Holy Spirit longs to illuminate for us. The majority of the energy and effort we spend in our relationship with God is laying a few distracted hours a week before the golden idol of a corporate religion and call ourselves Christians, instead of acting as the ecclesia we were meant to be. We are the called out ones, sent to actively guide the world back to Him. We actively continue the exact same mistakes the Hebrew did because it's what we know. It was what we grew up with and were immersed with from our youth, perpetuated by the religious powers as well as the Christians too afraid or spiritually lazy to face the struggle of genuine growth. In the face of such a terrifying God, it's easier to sink back into comfortable religious conformity, even as He promises us so much more if we would just step out onto the waves with Him. Our golden calf syndrome has beautiful music, awe-inspiring architecture, and ear-tickling sermons, but that was never what God commanded us from the mountain. As we close, let's consider our weekly meditation and ask yourself this question. What is the church? How is it defined in the Bible? And does the modern church reflect it? Why or why not?